We're in the thick of our Lent series, which let me remind you of, because if you missed a week, you shouldn't feel like you're walking into a movie halfway through. Each week, we're talking about one of Jesus's "you've heard it said" moments from Matthew 5. And we're placing it next to a modern script that tends to run our lives or culture unnoticed. And then we're letting Jesus confront that script, not to shame us, but to form us. Lent is our practice ground where we take small steps, small honest steps together. So far, week one, the question that we talked about was whose voice is that? Because we all have scripts playing in our heads, stitched together from family and church, our feeds, our fears, and the handful of sentences that maybe got said to us at the exact wrong moment in our lives. Week two was Jesus talking about don't murder, and dragging that upstream into anger and contempt, and that little inner courtroom where we rehearse closing arguments against people who hurt or betray or simply cut us off in traffic. Tonight we hit a passage that tends to make the room go quiet. Not in a I'm so deeply moved sort of quiet, but more like please don't make eye contact with me right now quiet. We're in Matthew 5, verses 27 through 30, and Jesus is talking about desire and lust and the way our attention can train our hearts. Here's the modern script we're naming this week. If it's private and no one gets hurt, it's fine. This script has 1,000 different disguises. It's just scrolling, or it's just fantasy, or it's just a habit, or it's not like I'm actually doing anything. It's not hurting anybody. And Jesus, in his annoying kindness, won't let us stop at that surface level response. Before we go any further tonight, 2 guardrails. First, like the previous 2 weeks, this is not a talk about shame. This is not a talk to shame anyone. Shame makes people hide. And hiding is basically the opposite of healing. Lent for us is tell the truth season. Real truth, not performative truth. So wherever you find yourself tonight on this topic, you are deeply loved. Second, we're going to talk about desire in a way that's human. Desire is not a villain. Attraction is not a villain. Having a body is not spiritual failure. The question is what we do with desire and what we train our eyes and our hearts to do, what we practice in private and what that practice turns us into over time. And before I go any further, I want to be clear. I'm saying everything about this topic to you tonight with a lot of love and also a lot of empathy. This is complicated and difficult stuff. My life has been deeply, profoundly impacted by what we're talking about, and I'm not speaking about it from the sidelines. I am speaking about this from someone who has been in the gutters of addiction and found grace and healing in the midst of it. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, Jesus is not trying to turn you into a nervous wreck who can't look at anybody at Target. He's trying to make you whole. So with that in mind, here's our text for tonight, Matthew 5, verses 27 through 30. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." Intense, right? Jesus is really blunt here on purpose. He takes a command that everybody already agrees with, and then he goes after the inner world, where the command starts getting negotiated and justified and eventually acted out. He's saying you've learned to keep this rule on the outside. Now let's talk about what the rule was always trying to form on the inside. So when Jesus says, "You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery," everyone listening would be like, yeah, absolutely. That's a familiar command. It's a very clear line. But then Jesus shifts the focus. Or better, he shows where the focus always was before we pretended it was only about behavior. When we hear this, we usually run to one of 2 responses. The first is shame and panic. Like, great, I guess I'm just really broken. And we turn the whole thing into self-loathing. The second is annoyance. Like, this is outdated, prudish, and repressive first century sexual ethics. And we dismiss it like Jesus is just mad at people having fun. Both miss the point. Jesus isn't trying to crush our humanity. He isn't trying to police what is totally normal attraction. He's trying to protect people from being reduced and protect you from being the kind of person who can only consume instead of actually love. A lot of us live like the private world is morally neutral. Like what I do in my mind or on my phone late at night, what I indulge in when no one knows, none of it counts as long as I don't cross some visible line. That's the no one gets hurt script. And Jesus says actually all of it counts because it's forming something in you. This is what Jesus does throughout this section of the Sermon on the Mount that we're looking at. Last week, he didn't just say don't murder. He said, let's talk about contempt because contempt is where murder starts. Tonight, he doesn't just say don't commit adultery. He says, let's talk about lust because that's where adultery starts. And that's also where objectification starts. So here's the point. When Jesus dives deeper, he's not trying to trap us. He's trying to free us. The goal is formation, not performance. The modern cultural script that Jesus' words confront is if it's private and no one gets hurt, it's fine. This is one of those scripts that sounds really reasonable until you watch what it does. Like it sounds like maturity. It sounds like I'm not hurting anyone. It sounds like modern common sense. But Jesus is not only concerned with whether you broke a rule or not. He's concerned about whether you're becoming a person who can love. Private habits are still habits. Private thoughts are still grooves in your mind. Private patterns still build who you are. We already believe this in a bunch of different areas. If you privately practice generosity for 5 years, you don't suddenly become greedy in public. You become generous. It becomes who you are. If you privately practice bitterness for 5 years, you don't become warm and open in public. You become guarded. You become suspicious. That becomes who you are. And if you privately practice consuming others, reducing them to bodies and images and fantasy, you don't magically become a fully present, tender, and honoring when you're with real people. You get trained to consume. This is the world that we live in, a hyper-visual culture where bodies become products and people become content. And if you're thinking, yes, that's absolutely true for the world, cool. Now, let's make it personal. Because this is where we like to talk in generalities, right? Like culture is so overly sexualized, or the things kids have to deal with these days, or media is so wild right now, which is a great strategy because it lets us critique the problem while staying distanced from it by staying unaffected by it. But Jesus doesn't let us stay unaffected. So what does private mean for us? It's the scroll. It's the second look. It's the saved folder. It's the harmless fantasy. It's the emotional affair that you keep calling friendship because nothing physical has happened. It's the flirting you do at work because it makes you feel alive. It's the way you use someone's attention like a vitamin, and you call it just being friendly. It's also the way that we look at ourselves. Some of us have learned to treat our own bodies like objects, like a project, like a problem, like a product for you to improve. You can easily objectify yourself. You can consume yourself. You can stare at yourself with contempt and call it motivation. Jesus cares about where our gaze goes because the gaze is a doorway. It's the opening of a loop. Look, imagine, want, repeat. And over time, that loop forms a person. So the question tonight is, have you ever noticed someone attractive? That's just called being alive. The question is, what are you practicing with your attention? What are you training yourself to do when desire wakes up? Because the truth is, you are always becoming someone. The private world is not neutral. The private world is a workshop. Let's talk about our brains for a minute and how they actually work. Because sometimes we treat formation like it happens in a vacuum, as if we're just floating brains who occasionally bump into a Bible verse. Your brain is built to learn through repetition and reward. When something feels rewarding, your brain takes note of that. It tags it. It says, that mattered. Let's do that again. That reward system is heavily connected to dopamine. And dopamine is not simply a pleasure chemical. It's more like motivation and pursuit, a motivation and pursuit signal. Dopamine is deeply tied to wanting and seeking and anticipating, and novelty amps it up. New images, new stimulation, new possibilities, new what-ifs. Your brain goes, oh, this is interesting. Let's keep doing this. This is why scrolling is so addictive even when it's boring. You're not chasing joy, you're chasing that next little hit of novelty. The next little possibility that something will be interesting or validating or enticing or enraging or whatever. And it's training your attention to live in a constant state of reaching. Now bring all that back to Jesus' words. When Jesus talks about looking with lust, he's not merely talking about seeing beauty. He's talking about the kind of looking that turns a person into an object for our consumption. In a dopamine-driven novelty machine, objectification becomes the easiest thing. The whole system is designed to present bodies like products. Swipe, scroll, compare, consume, and the brain starts expecting novelty as a baseline. Real life starts to feel slow, real relationships start to feel inconvenient, real people have needs and stories and boundaries and baggage, which is frankly rude of them because the fantasy person in your head never asks you for anything. So Jesus is doing something deeply compassionate here. He's saying, pay attention to what your eyes are training your heart to do. Because what you repeatedly give your attention to becomes easier to return to again and again. That's neuroplasticity in plain language. The brain strengthens the pathways you use most. Your attention has ruts. Your mind has habits. So when Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, he's using a kind of shocking hyperbolic language to say, take this seriously. Don't casually play with patterns that are reshaping who you are. He's not telling you to mutilate your body. If he were, the early church would have become the weirdest optometry experiment in history. Instead, he's saying, be ruthless with whatever is training you toward objectification and away from love. A simple test to test the difference between attraction and lust. Attraction says, I notice you, or I notice that person is beautiful. It can even say, I'm interested, but it leaves the person whole. Lust says, you are for me. Lust reduces. It takes a human being and flattens them into a thing. It consumes. Lust says, I want what you can give me, and does not require the person's full humanity. You can do this with people you'll never meet. You can do this with coworkers. You can do this with strangers. You can do this with your spouse, which is a weird sentence, but true. You can treat a partner like a vending machine for validation or comfort or gratification or attention, and then get mad when they don't dispense what you want on command. Jesus wants us to have a different kind of seeing. He wants the kind of seeing where someone remains an image bearer, not a body for you to use. And maybe you're thinking, okay, but why is Jesus so intense about this? Because Jesus knows what desire can do when it gets trained in secret. It becomes a script that starts running automatically, and the script gets louder. You don't choose it as much as it chooses you. Now let's get just painfully practical. Your life is largely built around habit loops. A habit loop is simple. It's a trigger, a routine, and a reward. A trigger might be you feel lonely, or you feel stressed, or you feel rejected, or you feel bored. Or maybe it's late and you should go to bed, but your brain is buzzing. The routine might be you pick up your phone, you open the app, you search, you scroll, you fantasize, you check out, you reach for the thing that gives you that quick hit of relief. And the reward is you feel less anxious, or maybe a little less bored, or a little less alone, a little more powerful, a little more desired. It's temporary, but it's real enough for your brain to file that under a helpful scenario. The problem is that loop gets stronger, and the trigger becomes automatic. You don't even think, you just reach. And this is exactly what we call addiction. This is why it's private script is so deceptive, because what you do in private does not stay private. It leaks into you. It shapes your thresholds. It shapes your expectations. It shapes your ability to be present. And it does hurt people, even if you never get caught. It hurts you. It hurts your capacity to love. It hurts your ability to see people as whole. It hurts your ability to stay in relationships when they get difficult or boring, because boring is what real life is most of the time. It hurts your ability to be honest. If you just want to get really practical, a very honest test is simply ask yourself, does this practice make me more loving, more patient, more present, more honest, or more resilient? Or does it make me more secretive, more detached, more impatient, more objectifying, more entitled, or more anxious? And look, I get it. Some of us have developed these patterns because we're trying to survive. Some of you have learned early that you couldn't rely on people. Some of you found a private world where you could feel something, you could control something, soothe something without being disappointed. Some of you learned early that affection was conditional or manipulative or absent. So you built a fantasy world where you could be wanted without risk. Some of you are carrying grief or depression or anxiety or chronic stress, and the private pattern became your pressure release valve. So when Jesus confronts this, he's not saying you're disgusting. He's saying you're hurting, and your coping mechanism is shaping you in a direction that will cost you your freedom. That's why he uses extreme language, because he loves you too much to let you stay trapped. Now, this also needs to be said clearly. People can hear teachings like this and spiral into self-hatred, especially for those of you who have been around harsh religion. So hear me. Conviction sounds like an invitation. Shame sounds like a death sentence. Conviction says, come into the light. Let's deal with this. You were made for more. And shame says, hide. You're gross. People will be horrified. Conviction produces honesty and courage. Shame produces more secrecy and more isolation. Jesus is inviting us into the light. And practically, that means something like, if you know the trigger, you can change the routine. You can interrupt the loop. If late night loneliness is your trigger, change the environment. Put the phone in another room. Charge it outside of your bedroom. Use app limits. Ask someone to check on you. Go to bed earlier, which I know is a wild suggestion. The spiritual discipline of sleep is highly underrated. If stress is the trigger, build a different routine. Take a walk, do push-ups, journal, text a friend, pray a breath prayer. If you need help, ask for help. You don't get bonus points for white-knuckling your life alone. And if you're thinking, I've tried all of these things, they don't work, I know that despair. You may need to dig deeper into the reasons behind the habits that you've cultivated, rather than just trying to modify your behavior. I certainly had to. And I'm happy to talk with you about that and help you find resources that actually do bring about deep change. What we're after is retraining. Retraining our imagination, retraining our attention, retraining the reflex to turn people into objects. It's not a quick fix, but it is possible. I am living proof of that. I want to say something that might sound strange, but this is true. A lot of lust is not actually about anything sexual. It's about escape. It's about control. It's about avoiding feeling. It's about soothing. It's about feeling like you're in power. It's about trying to fill a longing that was never meant to be filled by another person detached from you, another person on a screen, or another person in your mind. So Jesus isn't saying to you, stop wanting. He's saying, let your wanting become more whole, more real. Let your desire lead you to connection, honesty, dignity, and presence. Let your desire lead you to God, who is the source of all our reaching. Now, for a moment, I want to broaden this beyond what we commonly think of when we're talking about lust, like porn or fantasy, because some people hear lust and they immediately categorize it as a problem that other people have. But you can lust after status. You can lust after attention. You can lust after being admired. You can lust after the fantasy version of your life where you finally feel safe and important. Desire is powerful. It's meant to move you toward life. But it can also be hijacked and trained toward consumption. So the invitation tonight is not try harder. It's simply tell the truth. Tell the truth about what you're experiencing and what it's doing to you and what it's costing you. Repentance is turning from one story to another. Turning from private means harmless to private means formative. Turning from I need this to cope to I need help, I need light, I need community. Turning from people are for me to people are image bearers of God. And if you feel exposed, if you feel resistance, if you feel the urge to shut down, that's okay. That's information. Lent is good at surfacing what we've been using to stay numb. So before we rush past this, slow down and take a breath. You don't have to solve your whole life tonight. You don't have to make a bunch of promises you can't keep. The next faithful step might be smaller than you want it to be and still be real. Maybe it's just naming the things that trigger you. Maybe it's enacting one boundary. Maybe it's telling one trusted person the truth about what's going on in your life. Maybe it's simply admitting this is shaping me and asking Jesus to meet you there. Here's a few reflection questions to help you think through this more concretely this week. The first is, where does the script, if it's private and no one gets hurt, it's fine, show up most in your life? What do you tend to call it when you're trying to make it sound harmless? The second is, think about your most common trigger. Stress or loneliness or boredom, insecurity, fatigue. What do you usually reach for when that trigger hits? And what reward are you actually chasing? And then finally, what's one concrete boundary that would be wise to tear it out as a tear it out move for you? Maybe it's an app limit or moving your phone at night or unfollowing accounts or telling a trusted friend. Maybe it's starting therapy or joining a group. What's one step that brings this into the light? To wrap up, Jesus' words tonight are intense because he's talking about something important. He's talking about formation. Desire trains the heart. Attention forms the soul. Private patterns shape public lives. What you practice in the dark doesn't stay in the dark. It becomes your reflex in the light. Our world keeps preaching the no one gets hurt script. And it pairs perfectly with a phone in your hand and novelty on demand. Scroll a little, soothe a little, repeat a little, and pretty soon the trigger feels automatic. That's the trap. You stop choosing it as much as it starts choosing you. So the invitation is painfully practical. Bring it into the light. Name your most common trigger and enact one clear boundary at the access point. Not a vague intention, a real door that you close. Because boundaries aren't punishment, they're wisdom. That's how you interrupt a loop and make room for a different kind of wanting. And when you stumble, treat it like information, not a verdict about who you are. Notice what set it off. Notice what you're actually desiring. Then return. I've said this a million times at this point. You don't win Lent. You don't fail Lent. You tell the truth. You take the next honest step. You are not alone. You are not beyond restoration, but you are being formed whether you mean to be or not. May we be formed intentionally. May Jesus retrain our seeing so that we don't reduce people to objects. May we refuse the script that says private means harmless and practice a story where people remain people, where love stays possible, and where we become whole. And when we stumble, may we return to the light with honesty and with courage. Would you pray with me? God, may we be a community that is relentless about the patterns in our hearts that dehumanize the people around us. God, may we be a community that is honest and courageous in facing the ways that we try to take from others, to fill the holes in our hearts that only you can fill. God, may we be people that are together, moving towards health and wholeness, so that we can reflect your love more beautifully to the world around us. We love you, God. It's in your name we pray. Amen.